Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to our 12 p.m. session on day 2 of the Growth Club. We are going to jump straight in because I assume you've been into a few sessions, so you know the drill and how this goes. If for some reason this is your first time here at the Growth Club, welcome. We're so glad. Feel free to turn your volume up if you haven't done that already. Jump into the chat, let me know you can hear and see everything okay. We're here at the Growth Club presented by the firm talking about workflow, AI, compliance, productivity. And in this session, we're talking about scaling. So how do you go from 0 employees to 35 and all the trouble and the issues you're probably bound to experience along the way? Joined by Jordan Vickery and Martin Brennan. I'm going to hand over to them in just a second. A few quick housekeeping. All of our sessions are being recorded and transcribed today thanks to the wonderful team at Vinyl. That means you're going to get access to transcripts and key takeaways from every single session, and they'll be available within the summit to access and play with after the fact. We do this so that you can get lots of value out of every session, not just what you experience on this call today. There is one CPD point available from all of the sessions. There'll be more information from the team at EquitiWise after the summit to help you understand how to verify that and get that. Your chance to win $500. We're still running this. Jump on LinkedIn, tag the firm, put in the hashtag Growth Club, and show us what you got. Show me and tell me what you've learned, and you will possibly win cold hard cash or gift cards that you can spend on whatever you want. And I look forward to seeing that social media post as well. Huge shout to the team at Intuit QuickBooks for being our major partner for this event. Huge thanks to the other partners that got involved for the summit as well. If you haven't already, I recommend you go and check those guys out and see what they are doing. Look, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jordan and Martin. They have a lot to cover in this session, so I'm going to let them jump straight in. Jordan, I'm going to hand over to you and let you take it away. Thank you so much, everyone. Sit tight, and we'll see you all very soon.
Okay, welcome everybody to another session at the Growth Club Summit. Thank you for taking the time to join us here today. Hopefully you've had an amazing day so far with some of the sessions that have already happened so far this morning. It gives me great pleasure to be joined today by Martin Brennan from Onside Accounting. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar, Martin and Onside are a firm based here in the UK. And in this session, Martin's going to be pulling back the curtain and sharing his journey of scaling the firm from 0 to 35 employees and really kind of getting into the weeds of what it takes to scale a modern accounting firm today. Now, before we get started, Martin, do you mind giving us a very quick introduction to yourself and your firm?
So I'm Martin Brennan. I founded the company almost exactly 4 years ago to the day. We're a remote first business. Everybody works from home, and we're specialising in supporting technology startups that are UK based, but some international ones as well. We're actually a team of 38 now. We've had three new hires since Jordan and I agreed on the title of this session. So yeah, look forward to sharing the highs and the lows with you all today.
Nice. And I know that for the conversation, we're going to kind of theme this in 3 parts. The first part is really around preparation and getting started and looking at what you did in those early years and the kind of first few months. The second part is then looking at hiring and building out the team. You know, like you mentioned, you just added 3 new people in the last couple of weeks, which is amazing. It'd be really good to get into the weeds of how you're building out that team. And then the third part will be looking at leadership and scaling and what it is you're doing to kind of pull yourself out of the business. So let's start at the kind of beginning. How did you prepare to make the leap into Onside Accounting in the first place? I know that obviously you came from another job within practice. What were some of the things that you put in place to make that decision easier and to kind of take that initial leap?
Yeah, to be honest, it all kind of came together during COVID. I'd never worked from home before that, really, and I had the opportunity to, but I never really used it. I felt that I had to be in the office, and then during COVID, I just completely changed my mindset on the whole thing and fell in love with home working. And as companies were preparing to go back to the office in 21, I was feeling more and more that I wanted this to be a permanent thing. We also, myself and my wife, we were starting kind of family planning, and I really wanted a business where I could be present at home and not spending 2 or 3 hours a day on the train. All of those things kind of happened in sort of late 2020, early 2021, and we started the company in June. Really, I think that the only thing stopping me, as is the case with most people that I speak to that come to me for advice on how to start a practice, is generally around finances and you know, how can you be financially secure? Maybe you've got a mortgage, you've got, you know, nursery fees to pay for, various other commitments, cars and what have you. And I was no different, really. I was quite worried about that. I, had concerns about what would happen if I didn't get any new clients in the door and that kind of thing. So the approach that I took was to be really open and honest with my former boss, who was really good about the whole thing as well. And I said to him that I wanted to do my own thing. I would, of course, honor my contract, etc. But I also identified that the contract I had didn't really work for either of us at that stage, because I wanted more time than my 3-month notice, and he probably needed me more than my 3-month notice gave him. So we made a deal where I would work a longer notice, and during that time I would, in the background, in the evenings and weekends and what have you, be able to work on my own clients. I collected a few family and friends clients to start with, and in the end I did an 8-month notice that went from 5 days a week to 4 days a week to 3 days a week to 2 days a week, and until I dropped off completely. And that planning, I guess, just the the integrity on both sides around the departure and how that would work was the best thing I could have done in the circumstances, and it meant that on day one of starting the business I had enough money to pay the bills on day one. So
Yeah.
really pleased with how all of that played out.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you had a really good plan in place to kind of facilitate that jump, which is super important. Which kind of leads us into like the start of your early practice life. 4 years ago, you're getting started. Obviously, one of the first things that people need to do as they get started is think about building out a team. And I know that one of the questions, and I hear it come up time and time again, is around, do we hire somebody that's billable? Do we hire somebody that's not billable that could help us with things like operations and admin? And I know for you, very early on in your journey, you actually made the decision to hire a non-billable staff member. Talk us through that.
Yeah, it was born out of experience, really. I've been a practice manager before in a practice that had 72 staff, I think, when I left. I'd also been an operations director in my previous role, and as a qualified accountant, somebody who's quite technical, client facing, and all the rest. The reality is that you don't really spend much time on operations or practice management in those roles. What happens is you end up line managing. You're dealing with technical challenges, tax work, reviewing accounting work, troubleshooting issues, maybe stepping in and resolving client complaints and things like that. And I made a conscious effort to do something differently this time, and I actively pursued a non-accountant. I didn't even interview a single accountant for my operations director role that we began advertising for in early 2023. Landed on somebody who'd worked in various sectors, more recently legal, but before that education and technology. What that meant was we had somebody come in on day extremely comfortable, picking up kind of all of the non-client facing, all of the non-billable stuff. So HR, IT, and general operations, all of that stuff was picked up by that hire, and she's still with us today, and it proved to be a really good thing because it freed me up considerably to focus on what I'm good at, which was growing the revenues, picking up new clients, getting the work out of the door, leading the accounting team, and at the same time she had that nice boundary in place that stopped her from being pulled into those things, and was able to focus on the right things. So yeah, I would fully recommend that, but completely understand that it's quite a risk. I think most people, again, it comes down to finances, doesn't it? If your business is young and you're thinking about hires to support you, generally speaking, you want people that can grow the top line. But I do think that comes at a price, and the likes of HR, IT, and so on generally get neglected when you take that approach, in my experience. So yeah, a good decision in the end.
I've got two follow-up questions to that, if I may. So the first is around, you mentioned that they were responsible for general ops. Just give us kind of like 3 or 5 bullet points of what that job description looks like. What were some of the things that they were actually doing for you on a daily basis in those early years?
Yeah, so if you picture, we don't have an office manager, right? We don't have any admin support or anything like that. So it was a very kind of top-heavy hire in the sense that we went for an ops director. So if you think about all of the work that's involved in onboarding an employee, for example, so she took on the employee onboarding process entirely, and that's everything from getting the contracts out of the door, ordering the IT equipment, welcoming them on their first day, setting up all of their training, setting up all of their software. Obviously, being in a remote business, it's really important that this is tightly managed. So there was a lot of things around kind of just growing our team, and we went from 8 people at the end of 2022 to I think close to 20 the following year. So she did have pretty much on average 1 a month to onboard during her first 12 months with us. So yeah, I'd say employee onboarding is probably the best case, but it was everything from that to kind of actually moving our systems away from outdated legacy systems. For example, we moved everything from OneDrive to SharePoint, and that was something that she did quite early on. We also removed our existing practice management solution Center and replaced it with Carbon, and that was again something that she led. So just lots and lots of mini projects, I guess, that are just ongoing in a business like that.
Yeah, things are often eaten to the time, and you don't realize they're stacking up until it's too late.
Yeah.
My other part two question to what you said was around the financial aspect. I think you quite rightly said that the biggest concern for people is around finances and not knowing if they've got enough money to afford somebody that's non-billable. I guess my question is, how did you know? Was there a certain metric or kind of benchmark of profitability that you were looking for? Like, how did you feel comfortable making that decision?
Yeah, it was generally the theoretical side in terms of, well, if I had 50% of my role that was client facing and billable work and 50% of my role that wasn't, because I was doing all of those things before. And I missed out some key things, by the way, like our ops director heads out all of the recruitment, and we were doing a lot of interviewing and things like that. So, we just had, I'd say 50% of my role was non-billable. So in theory, I felt that if I could replace that, that meant that I had double the time to work on growing the business, winning new work, turning around work in a high quality way that led to more work coming the door. So it really just felt that I could double my efforts on growing the top line, and that proved to be the case, really, because we had our biggest period of growth was 2023, which coincides with when we did that hire.
Amazing. The proof is in the pudding. I want to jump across to pricing for a second, because obviously getting started, you need to figure out what does that pricing model look like? How are you going to price for your services? You mentioned earlier on in the introduction that you specialize in working with tech startups that are a certain type of business and require certain services that other businesses might not. So kind of talk us through, like, how did you develop that first pricing model, and how did you know that it was sustainable? And I guess part two of that is, how has that changed over the years, if at all?
Yeah, so I made the decision from day one, really, to link the majority of the services to transaction volumes. So if we take bookkeeping, payment runs, VAT returns, management accounts, year-end accounts, I feel that those 5 services in particular are, in terms of the workload required, are driven by the actual volume in the business. In businesses that I've worked in the past, and plenty that I speak to today, generally they price things based on revenue, and obviously there's a link there to risk and so on, and I get that. But I was looking to target a tech startup space, which is at times growing really, really fast. A typical client might go through seed funding and then Series A funding within 12 months, and that might mean that their team goes from 2 people to 25 people, and their transaction volumes quadruple during that time. So if a client signs up with you for certain services when their transactions are low, and then all of a sudden everything's skyrocketing, and you're not keeping a lid on that in terms of understanding actually when you need to add capacity and when you need to increase the fees to make sure that the capacity can be there, then you're going to run into problems. You hear a lot of people talking about scope creep, and it's that thing. It's more prominent in the space that we operate in, where these companies are growing rapidly. So nothing has changed, really. We did that on day one. It's still the case now. The only thing that we've done is really kind of refined and iterated the service by service how that's working for us. We reflect on what's working and what's not, and we do an annual price adjustment every 12 months just to do those small tweaks. But I would say nothing much has changed from 4 years ago when we started the thing.
And it's 12 months for all of your clients that you're rescoping?
Yeah, exactly. It's typical kind of annual price adjustment, really. Everything it applies to every client from January each year.
Okay. One of the things that I always get from speaking to you is that it feels like you value simplicity. Like you never want to overcomplicate anything. You always want something to be like a really simple but robust approach and system. So talk us through, like, as the business has grown, how have you kept things simple and not let them kind of grow into these really complex problems that you have to manage?
Yeah, to be honest, I think simple or not simple can work. I choose simple because I knew that we were dealing with fast growing clients, and I knew that we would become a fast growing business ourselves, but by virtue of the fact that our clients are growing, we're going to grow with them, but also we were loading on new clients left, right, and centre. So when it comes to onboarding an employee, finding employees during the recruitment phase, it can be really tough to find somebody who knows, I don't know, Free Agent, Xero, QuickBooks, Iris, all of the major kind of softwares out there. So we decided very early on that we would just keep the business really simple in that respect. Every single one of our clients is on Xero, for example. Every single payroll client that we have is on BrightPay. We only use Apron for payments and for bookkeeping, bar 2 clients who we have an exception for. And that's just meant that if all of our clients are using the same tools, then efficiency is going to be strong. And when it comes to onboarding or recruiting for employees, we know exactly what we're looking for, and we don't have to too much of a training gap when people join, and we don't find people in that horrible, situation where they get thrown a QuickBooks client for the first time and they don't know how to use it, or that kind of thing. And this again is born out of experience. I've been in businesses where all of a sudden, an attractive fee opportunity comes through the door, and you sign it up, and then actually you regret it in a big way because the team don't know how to handle it. The client becomes dissatisfied, and the team become demotivated, and all of a sudden, you reflect on what was a mistake. So very happy with that approach. I think we are expanding that slightly. We're getting bigger and we're getting more capability, and we want to have more. We want to cover the space a bit more. So we are trialing different things and just kind of understanding it. Where there's a business case to bring in something new alongside what we have currently, or even to replace something that we have.
Okay. I guess recapping on this section slightly then. So you had a really solid plan in place for when you left your previous job to start the firm. You made a decision early on to hire somebody to do all of the ops stuff that wasn't used, so that you could really focus on the billable time and sales and bring in new clients. And then you also built out some kind of really simple systems for things like pricing, onboarding, and even the kind of delivery of work in terms of the tech stack that you use. Two kind of follow-up questions. The first is, why did you decide the tech niche? Was there something specific in that niche? Was it something you had experience in before?
Yeah, I worked with it most of the last 6 years in my last two jobs before here. So I worked in Blake Rothenberg, a big firm who had some tech clients, but also some other clients that were very interesting. And then I worked in a smaller practice before this, where I got lots of experience to tech startups. And going way back, sort of 10 years ago, I worked in a business that had 4,500 contractor freelancer clients, and then they became part of a group, and there became 19,000 contractor freelancer clients that were all kind of identical in nature, and there wasn't really much going on. They weren't very exciting clients to be dealing with. If I'm being honest, I didn't get a huge amount of joy either technically or from dealing with the founders of those businesses. A big contrast to these tech startup clients that they want to be the next Facebook, and they've got these very passionate founder types. You see them convert ideas into real businesses. Obviously, not all of them succeed, but many do. And I think just the day in, day out being the variety, the unexpected, the high growth, the knowing that you're supporting something big and meaningful and often purposeful, and something that benefits society or whatever else that these tech companies are going for. There's obviously a lot of focus on ESG and things like that now as well, and some of these businesses are doing incredible things for charities and stuff like that. So there's a huge mix of reasons why we like the tech startup, but I would just say it's never boring. It's always interesting, and you can be part of some really, really interesting businesses and success stories. So I'd say the vast majority of our team on joining are excited by that, and it's a big part of the enjoyment of the role. It's not monotonous, it's not boring. You're not doing the same set of accounts year on year. It always looks different, and I think that's probably one of the most exciting areas to work in if you're an accountant, in my opinion.
Yeah, okay. And then my second question, just to wrap up this first part before we look at like the team and how you've built and scaled that out, is it sounds like you got a lot of things right in that first year, in terms of the planning and building out the system. So my question is, what was the biggest mistake you made in that first year? Like looking back on it now, what did you not get right?
In the first year specifically, mistakes were mainly around hiring, and that was me just, not following protocol, maybe not doing interviews as in depth as I normally would. I would normally do a 3-stage interview, but at times we were desperate, and I would, maybe satisfy myself with one interview, forget to do references, maybe even put a job description together hastily, just to try and fill a problem. So I'd say most of them were around hiring, and probably repeated a little bit in year two, if I'm being completely honest. I think that in the last 2 years we've improved significantly in that area, but in the first 2 years, most of that was on me for not following protocol and doing things the right way.
Got it. Which leads us beautifully into the next section, which is all around hiring and values and team building. You've obviously done an amazing job building out the team, 38 people now, which is incredible. What are the 3 non-negotiables, apart from technical expertise, which we assume that we need staff to have anyway, that you look for when you're hiring somebody new into the on-site team?
Yeah, so my views have changed quite a lot on this. It used to be the stuff that everybody would look for in an interview, the technical abilities and the businesses that are on their CV, these kind of things. I don't really pay too much attention to those things these days. It's a lot more focused on the remote working, for example, is probably number one now. It's more important to us that they've tried home working before and they love it than it is that they're the world's best accountant. So we found that actually there's still probably a minority, I would say, in terms of the general population. I think most people prefer to be in an office, and I completely understand that. But there is a minority of people out there that absolutely love home working, and we've got 30 odd of them now, and some of them have joined us purely for that reason. The person I described earlier in the ops director role, she was commuting from Belfast to Dublin before, and now gets something that suits her from home. We've got loads of people with dogs, for example, which is a funny one, but it's amazing how often people come to us during interview and say, well, they want to be able to walk their own dog at lunchtime and not be 50 miles away from home. So Yeah, I think the remote working fit is a really big one, and to those kind of hiring learnings in the first couple of the years that I take full responsibility for. We took chances on people that had never worked from home, and it backfired. In some cases, they would just miss the office life too much. It was too big of an adjustment. Maybe they didn't have the right setup at home. So yeah, remote working is probably number one on the non-negotiable list now. I think number two would probably be cultural fit. We've landed on a culture that has taken us 3 years to build. Really, it's absolutely brilliant at the moment. People are just in love with each other's successes. Anytime somebody does something great, whether it's something good for a client or a promotion or an exam pass or something like that, it's like the whole company kind of comes together and there's a big pile on in terms of celebrations. So the culture is really, really strong. But outside of the kind of celebrations and stuff, there are other company values that we have, such as demonstrating the right level of care for your colleagues and your clients. Growth is kind of number one on our list of values, and that means that we're dealing with growing clients, but we're a growing business ourselves, and we each have a chance to grow professionally and personally as we go along. So, we're looking for people who fit these values really, and we've landed on a lot of things in the last couple of years, but our values was one, and that's just helps us identify the right people for the culture fit. Number three, kind of an acid test really that I landed on in recent times is when you're at home. You're often isolated, and sometimes you get thrown into client calls and whatever, and you can't necessarily see what somebody's like on a client call. It's difficult to gauge, how they communicate with a client. Having not met them face to face yourself as well, it's even tougher. And just something that I ask myself now when I'm interviewing is, do I feel confident putting this person in front of a client on day one? And in terms of the hiring process, the interview, I don't think it does any harm to be put on the spot. And it's really interesting to see how people navigate difficult situations. Maybe a client asks you a really difficult question on the spot. You don't know the answer, but you feel like you should know the answer. How do you navigate that? How do you get out of it? And I think that we're in a position where we don't get to see too many of our clients face to face. And therefore, how you communicate on those calls and building that trust and that relationship with the client is really, really important. So having the confidence at interview that you could put them in front of a client on day one is something that I look for.
Okay. You mentioned values, and that's something that we've in our business also focused on building company values. And I guess one of the things I've always struggled with is how do you measure the values during the interview process? How do you truly get a feel for whether or not people align with those values? Because often they put on a bit of a kind of face and say, yeah, I'm that person. So do you have any kind of nice tips or tricks for that in the interview process?
Yeah, it's a good question. The black and white example that I would give you is that if for example, if we're encouraging people to care about their colleagues, if you ask somebody, can you give me 3 examples of where you've gone out of your way to demonstrate care for your colleagues in your past experience? If they can't come up with that off the top of their head immediately, then I would suggest that they're probably not a fit. And I know that probably seems a bit harsh, but those are the sorts of things where I think somebody who does on a daily basis go out of their way to consider, care for their colleagues, I think that they would have a list of 100 answers at the forefront of their mind, and would be reeling them off. So I think if you struggle to answer demonstrable examples of those values on the spot, I think unfortunately that's something that I would probably consider as a non-fit. And I know occasionally people struggle to interview and it can be difficult. You freeze or whatever, but I just think it's a bit of a red flag if somebody can't demonstrate those things on the spot like that.
Okay,
And you could do that, but you could do that with any of the values, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I want to look at hiring and building out that early team. Obviously, we spoke earlier about hiring the operations person early on. How did you decide which other roles to hire early first? And, what, in your opinion, what should be the first key hires that any growing practice should be considering?
Yeah, again, it was a little bit of a risky strategy just in terms of the financial risk that I was willing to take to make this hire right. And I decided to go with a client manager right away. So that was, again, quite a top heavy role. That person coming in knew that they would be responsible for doing more junior work than they're used to doing, but they also knew that they would over time develop and grow their own team. So it was always seen as a short-term thing. But I just felt that the situation we were in, and this was the first hire was in March 2022, and January, February 2022, I had 16 new clients, and some of them were sizable ones. So I became overwhelmed very, very quickly, and I was in a bit of trouble. And to be honest with you, I was working 70 hours a week or whatever just to try and keep on top of things, and this hire couldn't have come soon enough. So I went with a client manager on the basis that I knew I could just delegate pretty much everything I was doing for the simpler clients on day one, and that happened. I would say that the temptation that people get, and I see people make this mistake often, is that, okay, the business is lean, you don't have a huge amount of money, you've only just got to a point where you can afford a member of staff, and maybe you've got your own bills to pay, etc. It's very tempting to hire like an apprentice, say, or, somebody AAT level 2 type hire, maybe as an example. And the reality is you're going to spend a lot of time checking their work, training them, answering questions, and that's not really what you need if you're growing rapidly and you're under pressure.
Yeah, really good point. You're actually better paying more and sacrificing a bit of profit in the short term to free up more time for you to then focus on growing the business.
Yeah, it's a bit like the other example. It's the price you put on your time, right? At the end of the day, if you can guarantee a time return, then it's worth spending the extra money. And in this case, it was somebody I'd worked with before, so I also had the advantage of knowing that that person would come in and make a difference on day one. And we also knew how each other worked and each other's strengths and weaknesses and things like that, which was a big help.
Okay. Something you've mentioned a couple of times is the term values, and I know that values gets thrown around a lot in business. Some companies use it well. I think other companies just pay lip service to it, but it feels like it's something that's quite important to you. So, do you think that values and even like a long-term vision are something that firms need to clearly define from day one, or is it something that evolves as the company grows?
To my surprise, a lot of people like them during interview. I didn't appreciate how much of a role they had to play just in terms of being visible on our website. It was like a key aspect of any interviewee's preparation for coming into an interview with us. And so many of them asked about it. Why that? Why this? Can you give me examples? And that was quite interesting. So I would say a few years ago, if you asked me, I probably would say you don't really need them on day one. But I would say actually it's quite interesting to hear from interviewees how important that is. And as you say, sometimes it's rubbish, isn't it? What's on the website. I think if you need to be able to actually live and breathe those values and give examples. So just having them on your website means nothing. I think the key thing to your question around evolving them over time, for me, we do a strategy day every 6 months, and that's where we get the whole company in a room together for a day, and we just thrash out all kinds of things that need to be looked at to be able to improve and grow. There's always a section dedicated to values where we just say, look, are we true to these? Are we living and breathing them daily? Do they really represent what you're seeing and feeling? And do we need to replace some of them or add new ones? And we started out with 4. We've still got 4, but we did actually change 3 of them. I think in mid 2024, so just around a year ago, in our June strategy day last year, we kind of ripped them up and started again. And the ones that we have now are actually what we're feeling and living and breathing every day. And we had our strategy day recently, and we touched on it for like 10 seconds. It was like a unanimous, yeah, we're absolutely happy with these. And evolving them over time is a no-brainer for me. I think you have to react to what you're seeing and feeling. And the reality is, if you've got 1 or 2 people 4 years ago and now you've got 35, it's like the 33 people that came in since are going to have an effect, and they're going to have ideas, and they're going to do things that maybe you didn't see 4 years ago. And you've got to really just have a bit of visibility on what's going on in the business and translate that into something meaningful.
It sounds like they're not just evolving, but you're actually getting the team to buy into them and contribute towards them over time as well. So it's almost like as new team members come in, they feel like they're part of the values and how they're evolving in Onside. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. One of them wasn't even chosen by me. It was chosen by one of our hires, and everybody bought into it. Like, yeah, that's exactly how it should be, I think.
And do you think that you would be where you are today with Onside had you not spent time up front on kind of instilling these company values from day one?
To be honest, I don't think it would have dictated our success all that much, but it has helped. And I think that the main thing that we're seeing is that people just really understand them, and they go out of their way to demonstrate them. And you can link all of this back to performance, right? We have a quarterly KPI check-in, really, where we're just making sure that everybody's on track with their KPIs. And there is a section on values there, which is like, it basically puts the emphasis on the employee to be demonstrating the values at all times, and they have to come to us and show us examples every quarter. It's I don't think that it would have materially changed whether or not we would have had success over the last 4 years, because there's a lot of play there. What we've done is kind of imprinted them in people's minds and made them part of the performance review, so that actually people are actively looking for ways to demonstrate the values. And what that does is just has a knock-on effect to new joiners and all of that. So yeah, I guess just linking up values with KPIs and making sure that those regular reviews take place, because it's very easy to ignore them and not happen. But that's been a big part of why we've got the culture we've got today, I would say.
We actually do something very similar in Journey. So we do 90-day one-on-one performance reviews with our team. And 2 of the questions in there are, number 1, which value shines through most in you? And number 2, which value do you feel you need to improve on the most? And every 90 days, it's just a reminder to get them thinking about how are they living and breathing the values, but also what can they do to improve on them. So I think you're absolutely right. Kind of baking it into that performance process is so important.
I might nick that first one off you.
More than welcome. Another thing that often comes up in conversation with firm owners is this idea of like, how much do they share with their team in terms of the business performance? And I think historically, practice owners as perhaps been quite guarded with the actual performance of the firm, and it's for the partners and senior leadership team to discuss. What are your thoughts on this? Like, how open do you think that you need to be with your team and even your clients about what's going well in the business?
Yeah, I think I've always taken a view that it's important for me to develop the team commercially, and sometimes that means talking about problems in the business. Sometimes it means something else. But I think it's really important to be open with them, just to manage expectations in terms of, well, if they think that the business is doing amazingly well, then they probably think bonuses and whatever else will come really easily. Whereas if they understand that actually we've got some really tough challenges in the business, and this is how we can go about it to fix them, I think that only does good, and certainly doesn't do any harm. But as I say, I think that certainly with younger people, on my first 8 years in accounting, I didn't have a single insight into how the business was doing. I had no idea how profitable it was. I had no idea how much revenue we had or anything. It was really quite detached, and that cost me at times in my career, because I was probably a little bit naive going into later roles and going into senior management roles quite early in my career. That was a bit of a challenge. Everybody on our team has full access to the company strategy. They have full access to our KPIs. It's very clear there on what our revenue goals are, what our profitability goals are, gross margin and net margin. So they can put two and two together. And I send a KPI update every single month to the entire team, just saying where we stand on each one. So, we've got a growth target, we've got financial targets, we've got operational efficiency targets, we've got marketing, we've got quite elegant. So we're very transparent. We don't go give the detail to the penny, but you can broadly tell where we sit on each one. So that's more often than not, that's a very positive update. But recently we've actually had some really hard truths and hard shares to give the team, and the economic environment isn't a good one, and the venture capital market, which drives the investment that our clients receive, is in a completely different place to where it was 5 years ago, where it was much easier to get funding rounds then. These days, if you can't demonstrate a pathway to profitability or at least revenues, then you're probably not going to get funding. And what we've seen is a knock-on effect in terms of companies liquidating and closing down completely. We've seen more of them in the last 5 months in 2025 than we've seen in the last 4 years.
Wow, okay.
Before that. So that's something that I had to share with the team and explain that whilst we're doing everything to meet our KPIs, there are these kind of outside threats that are to a large extent outside of our control and sometimes unforeseeable completely. And the way we did that was, well, if we have sales targets of X, then we just need to double that. Right? We need to go even harder and make sure that we're not just meeting our targets, but we're outperforming them, because we've got a little, leakage at the other end in terms of these companies closing down. Some of these companies were like, big fee payers paying us several thousands a month, so they were big hits on our financials, and we've had to really sort of iterate and reforecast on a regular basis to take these things into account. So yeah, it's not all rosy, and I think the team need to know that, and we can't afford to be complacent. And so that was the most recent example I could give you. But yeah, generally speaking, I think I'm probably guilty of oversharing, to be honest, and I share probably more than I've been shared with in the past when I've been on the other end of it. But I think I would only really hold something back if I felt it would do more harm than good.
Can you give an example? Like, can you think of something that you have held back from the team and why you held it back?
Yeah, to be honest, sometimes you get leavers for good reasons. Sometimes you get leavers for not the right reasons. And I would never share the information about why somebody's left if it wasn't the right thing to do. So that's really the only thing I can think of, is that occasionally, whether it's due to performance, personal circumstances, or something entirely different, like, I'm not going to share that with the team. It doesn't do anybody any good. It probably just does harm to the person leaving. So that's probably the best example, I think, is you should keep some things back and just keep things as simple as possible when you need to.
Okay. Let's move into the final part of this discussion, which is really around leadership, delegation, scaling. We've kind of gone through the whole processes and getting everything in place and looking at the team and how you're building that out. And now I want to look at you as a leader and how you're kind of managing everything within the business. So one of the biggest challenges for practice owners is always stepping away from client relationships. How have you managed that? How have you kind of pulled yourself out, or even avoided getting drawn into, in the first place, those key client relationships within the firm?
To be honest, it's not been that difficult. I think that the hard thing for me has been sales. I've struggled to delegate sales. Key client relationships, I would say that really it's just about getting comfortable that the person you're handing it over to can do as good a job as you did. That just all comes from trust, really. And we've done a very good job of that in recent times. And I'm only involved in one client now, and that's because they asked if they could pay for my personal ad on this particular job. So that's a good place for me to be. I've always felt that as long as I'm in the distance, as long as the client knows my phone number and they know if they've ever got a big problem or they're not happy I'm here, then I think any situation is salvageable. So I don't see too much risk in handing over those key client relationships. If I've got confidence in the person, I will do it. Sales is different. It's like you're handing that over. If it goes wrong, it's lost forever. If you hand that over and 6 months later you've had no sales, like you can't save that. And that one's been harder for me to let go of. And to be fair, I have just appointed a commercial director, so I'm finally at a point where actually I feel comfortable stepping away from business development altogether. And that's a really good place to be. It's taken me 4 years to get there, but I would say sales is probably the hardest one to let go of until you find that person that you think is going to do a better job of it than you do.
So let's just jump back into the key client relationships piece first. So obviously you found it quite easy. What did you put in place to make that easy? Like, do you introduce the kind of team member who's going to be leading on the client early on in the process? Do you have them involved in those initial meetings with the client? Talk us through kind of what actually happens there.
It's a good one. I think, again, a lot of it comes down to your attitude to spending and do you want to, for example, do you want to hire a £30,000 client manager or do you want to hire a £60,000 client manager, right? They're very, very different things. We're certainly at the top end. We benchmark our salaries against the biggest firms in London, so we know that we're hiring at the top end of that, and we get the good quality people in return. So then it's really just about making the client aware of this person's capabilities and helping that trust develop. Sometimes the client just sees it as a new face. They don't know who that person is and they've got no reason to believe they're any good. And more recently, I introduced a client manager who's actually been in practice longer than I have, and she's been ACCA qualified longer than I have. And, it's like just helping the client understand just how qualified that person is and that there are actually a natural and like-for-like replacement is really important. And then you can do things in the background just to, keep an eye on things. So we use Slack and we have Slack channels with many of our clients. And I stay in the ones where I think the client needs a bit more convincing. And as soon as I get to a point where I feel that the client's made a good connection with the client manager, I'll step away completely. Clients where I might feel that actually the person needs a bit of training or mentorship in the background, and so we would always do that work in a non-client facing way. So if I feel that actually that person could have done better on something, I'll tell them, and we'll always do that privately so that the next time they go into the meeting with the client, they've got a different perspective and a different way of impressing them. So yeah, lots of little things there, but really it just comes down to your confidence level, and often that comes with your gut instinct. We've landed on a really, really good management group now that are really comfortable. So I say it's easy. It hasn't always been easy, but in the last sort of year and a half or so, we've really improved in that respect, and I have genuinely been able to step away to a large extent. It doesn't stop clients reaching out to me though for various things, which still happens, but more often than not I'm able to just pass them back to the person who can support them.
I think it's about managing those expectations up front with the client as well, isn't it? Because often if you can let them know early in the process that you're not going to be the kind of main point of contact, that it's going to be somebody else in the team and they're the person responsible for day-to-day stuff and here's why you should contact them, then it kind of frames that expectation on day one. Whereas I feel like from conversations I've had with some other firms, they maybe don't convey that so well up front, and then the client often starts contacting them and they reply, and then that almost creates a habit where the client wants to contact the partner, and it's very difficult to break that once it's in place.
Yeah, it's true. I would say that many people are self-employed, and sometimes it's self-employed maybe with one or two people helping them. They might have, a bookkeeper or somebody else that works alongside them as well. Those types of businesses, that expectation definitely exists. So if you're having a sales conversation with somebody and you know that they're a one-man band or they've got, one other person helping them, say, it is realistic that person should expect to be dealing with that person. When they speak to us, they don't really see it that way. And even going back 3-4 years ago, they knew that I was hiring a team. They knew that I had ambitions to grow because I'm very open and honest during the sales call about what we're doing. And, it's not, the sales call isn't all about the client. They want to know about you. They want to know what you're building and what your vision is. And when I tell them that I'm looking to build something that's remote first and rewards people with families or dogs or whatever with flexible remote working, they love it. And they know that we're on a trajectory. I generally fit into conversation that we're growing, and I'll explain the team that they will be looking after them will be made up of 3 people. So if you're dropping those things into conversation nice and early, then it just becomes a really clear expectation that they've got three people dedicated to their account, and none of them are me. I must admit I've not had that problem once where people have said, "Oh, I thought you would be managing my account." It's not really how it works unless you're dealing with a self-employed person, in my experience.
Yeah. The other thing you mentioned was this kind of journey to delegating sales, and it sounds like it's something you're starting to crack, and you've hired the commercial director. Quick question: have they got accounting experience, the commercial director?
Yes.
Okay.
This is a
Because I
personal.
was going to ask, I was going to
Yeah.
say, because often you'll hear firms hiring a kind of sales rep who doesn't have accounting experience, and sometimes it can work, other times it doesn't work so well. Like, what's your take on that?
I think that salespeople generally in the world are very different to what you see in kind of a bigger accounting firm where the salesperson is a partner. Generally, they're somebody who can speak the the technical language, and they're somebody who could go to with almost any problem that's finance or tax or audit or whatever related. I've always felt that a business that's growing and that values relationships and is really interested in long-term client life cycle and all of the kind of associated metrics that come with that. I feel that a technical accountant in a business development role is really, really important. So I've led all the sales up to now pretty much. We've got this commercial director and a head of accounting who support on sales. All three of us are chartered accountants, and I don't see myself hiring outside of that. I think that if we grew the business development team, it would probably consist of qualified accountants that enjoy business development. So it's a bit of a personal view. I've seen it work in other ways, but I like the idea
Yeah.
of winning a client and then actually being part of that client relationship for a very long time, rather than a traditional sales cycle, which starts and ends, and then you never see that person again. So but yeah, I take a very long term view on these things.
Yeah, okay. You're obviously a remote business, 38 people, all working at home with their dogs. How do you maintain like a really strong internal culture and ensure that people are communicating effectively in this setup? Because it's not easy. Our team's fully remote, and often you think, God, it would be so much easier if everyone was just in the office together. So
Yeah.
talk me through how you've done that.
Yeah, I feel like I'm saying this a lot now, but like we got a lot of things wrong in the first sort of 2 years and a lot of things right in the last couple. It's really hard in a remote business. You know it yourself, but I think really, if you just go back to that recruitment phase where you're like identifying people with the right values, people with the right charisma, the right attitude, everything else, they will become your culture champions, and you need those everywhere. So when I'm trying to create this kind of culture where everybody's quite chatty and supportive and sharing what they get up to the weekend and their holiday pictures and their client wins and their exam performance and all of that, it's like it's not really going to work if it's just me that's pushing it. We need people that it needs to be a collective, and we need lots and lots of people driving that. So it's really hard to fit that into your entire, everything from recruitment through to your day to day. But I would say that finding those people early on, making it clear to them that you have an expectation of them, that they will bring something to the group, and that they will lift the people that need lifting, and that they will, maybe we've had a bad week, stressful week of VAT deadlines or whatever, and you need those people that will keep the mood good. People who have the sort of awareness and maybe emotional intelligence to understand when somebody's maybe a bit down or feeling a bit isolated, and knowing that they need a quick chat, because it's dead easy to pick up on those things in an office. It's a lot harder when you're I think that's what I would do in terms of the people. In terms of the clear communication, what have we done consistently? We've just put a lot of it into like a routine now. So I think people in my situation, where you're growing rapidly, you're overwhelmed a lot of the time. It can be really easy just to forget about company announcements, to forget about team meetings, to forget about leadership meetings, to forget about all these things. We've just got a set of things that are just now routine, and they've been there for ages. So for example, every single Wednesday without fail at 11 o'clock, we have a company-wide training session on something. It could be anything from tax to soft skills or sales process, whatever. And that's just one way of bringing the group together. Then we have a monthly team meeting, which is more about business updates and strategy and things like that. And we've got the quarterly KPI reviews, which are diarised by the ops director well in advance. We've got social meetings, so we use an app called Donut that allows us to meet randomly for a coffee with somebody in the business every week for 15, 20 minutes. So there's lots of things like that are working really, really well for us, and just allows us to keep communicating regularly.
Nice. So what I'm hearing is you just built some really solid systems and processes to make the culture and communication like a consistent part of daily life.
Yeah, and again, I think it came from a couple of years ago where we were just spotting certain things. You might not hear from somebody for an entire week, and it's like that's not right. I think that you've got to do your best to replicate that office atmosphere in terms of regular comms and accessibility and availability, those kind of things.
Okay. We're coming up to time, so I want to finish with a couple of quick fire questions just to give the people listening some actionable takeaways. So first question is, if you had to start again from scratch, what two things would you not do, and what two things would you absolutely repeat?
I'm going to go back to hiring. I wouldn't rush hiring. I I definitely rushed that a couple of times when I was under immense pressure. Somebody comes along who's immediately available, has a really short notice period or something like that. Like, it's very easy to fall into that trap, and it's very dangerous. A similar trap, really. The second thing that I wouldn't do is, we did occasionally dip outside of our ideal client. Maybe somebody who isn't quite using all our processes, but is using some. So, for example, it's on zero, but they wanted us to get heavily involved in their Google Sheets processes or something like that we weren't used to. I know it's a very simple thing to say in hindsight, but you kind of have a gut feeling at the time that you're not doing the right thing, but for whatever reason you're pulled in, whether or not you like the person or you like the business, or maybe you need the revenue because you just lost a big client or something like that. So I did that a couple of times, and I sort of went against my gut, and I regretted it in a big way. So I think really just staying true to what it is that you want in terms of your ideal client and not deviating from that too much is number two. The things I would repeat, definitely tech startups and kind of that sector is just something I really enjoy. I see myself being around it for a long time. As you know, I'm involved now as an advisory board member at Apron, so got a really keen interest in the area. And something a bit more unique, I made it my mission on day one to spend 1 day a week in London. I do that every Wednesday, and it can be for all kinds of reasons: to meet prospects, to meet existing clients, to meet some of my staff, to meet old colleagues, to go to networking events, go to industry events like Accountex. I have kept that going consistently, apart from when me and my wife had a newborn, around for 4 years now, and it's really paid off. If I look back through our client list, and I did this recently for a different exercise, but something I clocked was that something like 65% of our client list originates from a face-to-face meeting that I've had at some point in the past. And I do believe that, I know it sounds quite traditional and not today's world, but I do think that there's something in just meeting as many people face to face as possible, finding out what they're like as people, not going too heavy on the business side, and actually making some connections with people that you really like. What you'll find then is that you're in the front of their mind, and good things will follow. So that's something I would definitely do.
100%. I actually say that quite often. Obviously, I work in the online advertising space, but I'll say to people, what you do offline massively impacts the success of what you do online. If you can spend time in person with people face to face, have a coffee, have a beer, have lunch, whatever, you'll realize that then when they connect with you online and engage with you, it's so much more successful. So yeah,
and it's so much easier, isn't it? They're less likely to take an unprofessional tone with you, or be short with you, or maybe if you make a mistake, if you make a mistake on their accounts, they're going to have a bit more goodwill. It's there's all kinds of benefits to it. Some of it's probably just like not kind of in the subconscious, really. I don't think it's always the clear stuff, but it's definitely meaningful, and it made a big impact to us.
Final question, and if we come back to the title of the session, which was 0 to 35 employees, what does it really take to scale a modern accounting firm? I guess the question is, what are the signs for you that your business has truly scaled successfully? Like, what needs to be in place for you to sit there and say, we've made it, we've done it, we've kind of cracked this?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a work in progress, but there are signs. And the best one I could give you is middle of April. I came back from 2 weeks paternity leave, and it was the first time I'd kind of switched off completely from work for a 2 week period. So didn't even look at my business WhatsApp or my emails or my Slack messages once. I didn't hear from a single employee or client other than well wishes for the baby. And I came back on the Monday, and it kind of felt business as usual. There wasn't really any fires to be put out. I didn't have a queue of emails waiting for me. I didn't have really all that much to do. I spent an hour clearing down emails, and that was it. So that was a really nice sign. I've never had that before in the last 4 years. But if I'm being honest, there are times where I might take 3 days off and come back to all sorts, and there's ups and downs. But the fact I was able to do that for a period as long as 2 weeks, and there was a lot going on during that period. We actually hired 3 people during the 2 weeks that I was off, for example, and I wasn't involved in that, despite some back and forth on offers and things like that. So it's a real good sign that we're going in the right direction, and what we're doing is just expanding each of the functions one at a time. So we've got somebody now dedicated to the commercials, we've got somebody dedicated to a client service role, which is systems and process focused. We've got the operations person, which over time will split into individual roles, and we're just making sure that the right bums are in the right seats, and we're not kind of in this early maturity thing where you're wearing loads and loads of hats all the time, because I've seen with the growth, it creates quite a lot of confusion. We have a lot of blurred lines, and we need a bit more clarity and boundaries in place. So there's all kinds of work to get there. But to be fair, nothing has come as a surprise, because every single book that I've ever read on the subject tells you that like 25 to 50 people is where all the problems are. Right? If you can get to 50 people and you've survived, you'll probably be okay. And we're right in the middle of that. We're 37, 38 people, which is bang in the middle of that. So I made the decision just to really kind of double down on our management team, make sure we've got loads of bandwidth to tackle these issues that come up during that period. And we doubled our SLT from 3 people to 6 people in the last 7 months, and that's really paid off. So I think we are scaling successfully, but there's an inevitable amount of bumps that you will face, and I think that we're doing pretty well on the whole. So I can be happy, but we're certainly not made it.
Awesome. Martin, this has been great. Thank you so much for sharing everything so candidly. I really appreciate the time. Thank you, everybody that's been listening in. Appreciate you joining us for this session, and hope you enjoy the rest of the Growth Club Summit. And we'll catch you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin and Jordan. That was awesome. There was a lot. There was a lot to cover in that session, Martin. Honestly, incredible story. I love hearing it. I've heard it before, obviously, but I love hearing it every single time. So thank you for sharing and being so willing to share with everyone today. Hopefully, if you enjoyed that session, let me know in the chat below. I'm going to hand off because we're going to move on to our next sessions that are just about to start. We have 2 sessions at 1 o'clock. Building a firm you can sell or step away from. That is with Cassandra Scott and Suna Walkham. They've both sold their businesses, bookkeeping, accounting businesses, and are going to share and talk through all the things they learned during that process and the things that you should be aware of as well. And then the other session is an AI session with Inbal Rodney. Inbal is epic. What a speaker. So good, so practical, so helpful. Talking about Microsoft Copilot in action, how accounting firms are using it right now, and how you could be using it right now as well. Either one of those sessions, 2 very different ones. Obviously, got an AI session and then I guess succession planning, like planning for your exit type of session. They're both awesome. I recommend checking them out. If you haven't registered yet, jump onto the Summit page. You can see the 2 that are there. Jump in the one that you want to go and check out, and we will go from there. I'm going to end this session, and we'll see you all very soon. Thanks so much.